Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your patience, and welcome to the 2014-15 Bannon Institute on Ignatian Leadership. My name is McCabe. I'm the Executive Director of the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education. Since October, this year's Bannon Institute has been exploring the topic of leadership within the Ignatian tradition. Ignatian leadership, as we're calling it, is a practice or a way of proceeding that seeks to affect personal and communal transformation. Throughout the spring quarter, we are focusing on higher education as a place. Can you hear me?
Did you have a hard time hearing me before? Throughout the spring quarter, we focus on higher education as a place where leaders are formed. We examine the foundational and dynamic mission of Jesuit Catholic universities, such as Santa Clara, to educate whole persons, engaged citizens, and accountable leaders. Today we're pleased to welcome a panel convened by a senior statesman, as it were, in the sphere of Ignatian leadership. Andre Delbecq is the J. Thomas and Kathleen L. McCarthy University Professor in the Department of Management within the Levy School of Business here at Santa Clara University. Professor Delbecq directs the Institute for Spirituality of Organizational Leadership in the Levy School, where he was recruited as dean from 1979 to 1989. As a distinguished scholar, he has authored 3 books and more than 225 academic articles on executive decision-making and organizational innovation. Having served on many boards, corporate, academic, and nonprofit, Professor Delbecq has turned in more recent years to the area of leadership spirituality. In this field, he has broken new ground and provided immense support and mentoring for corporate executives, academic leaders, and nonprofit officers. In the field of healthcare, Professor Delbecq has been named Honorary Fellow of the American College of Physician Executives for contributions to physician education. He is also a fellow of the Ministry Leadership Center, which provides formation programs for senior healthcare executives. At Santa Clara University, Professor Delbecq has founded the Ignatian Faculty Forum. IFF, as we know it, is a collaborative program where faculty members at Santa Clara come together to deepen their understanding of Ignatian and other spiritual traditions. Access to these depths provides them with key resources for their own teaching, scholarship, and service, both to the university and the academy. In the world of Jesuit higher education, the Ignatian Faculty Forum is generally regarded as the gold standard of leadership development among faculty. I'm delighted to take this opportunity to announce that beginning next academic year, Professor Delbecq will deepen his service to the university as Senior Fellow of the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education, which I'm especially thrilled about. Andre is joined today by 3 colleagues who will provide responses to his lecture, and I will introduce them at the right moment. For now, though, I'm content to welcome our beloved and deeply respected colleague. The topic of the day is the bottom line of contemplative leadership, exploring the impact of spiritual engagement by organizational leaders in higher education, business, and healthcare. Please welcome Professor Andre Delbecq.
Thank you very much. I welcome all of you here. I have felt in my entire career as an academic that there was one dreadful month that I wish that I could skip, and that was May. Every faculty committee that I know puts off its report, and all of a sudden May comes alive, and there's the end of our own academic duties, and so I am grateful that so many of you are here. Deep gratitude to you, Mick, and to you, Teresa, to allow this reflection on the Ignatian Faculty Forum. When I came to Santa Clara University in 1979, I could never have anticipated reporting on the topic that I'm going to report on. And I'm even more privileged that colleagues from Le Moyne and the Ministry Leadership Center are going to share their reflections on the Senior Leadership Forum. There's much to be grateful for in all this. I'd like to begin with a paragraph. I'm going to read a paragraph And I'd like you to listen as carefully as you can. It's the only paragraph I will read slowly. An overarching theme in the Ignatian tradition is captured by the phrase, God in all things. In this spirituality, contemplative reflection first turns outward to discover how God is acting in the world, and then turns inward seeking an inner conversion. The conversion sought is to become more and more a woman or a man in service to others. The goal is to prepare for engagement with the world through actions that amplify God's light, actions not distracted by imperfection and human weakness that is always present. One seeks to discern spiritually mature and wise paths towards compassionate presence, to suffering, to a remediation of social distortions in the building of a more just world. Now, I ask you, did your eyes glaze a bit listening to that prose? And we sense nobility in the words. We sense perhaps even an invitation. But it's very tough to translate that conceptualization into the rough and tumble of one's life. This is what the Eastern traditions would call an invitation to karma yoga, a path of selfless service through action within the world. So imagine yourself as a young scholar seated in this audience. She's doing a revise and resubmit to a journal that's very, very important for her tenure packet. She has a set of papers to grade before tomorrow afternoon. She's preoccupied with a very difficult department meeting that's coming up in which there's a political rift within the department, but it's a strategic hire. She has to accept an invitation to join a colleague on a scholarly endeavor, but there are two invitations, and it will require both a gracious yes and a gracious no, and both of them are good choices. And her daughter at home is ill. You know, how do you make the kind of abstract language that we spoke of? How do you make it very real within the context of someone wired 24/7, subject to those kinds of pressures? When I was a young professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I was struggling with a lesser challenge. I was trying to bring the language of social psychology to bear on management thought, and it was the early days of the interpenetration of social psychological studies and management thought. There was no psychology today, and there was no psychobabble on the airwaves at night. It was a very strange language to most business leaders. And I found out that I could be successful if I had students with me for a quarter. But the University of Wisconsin-Madison had a strong commitment to outreach services as a land-grant university, and so we were constantly invited to present to agricultural leaders and business leaders and government leaders, and I would meet with them, and their eyes would glaze. Their eyes would glaze, and there was only one exception. There was a consultant in Milwaukee who had formed an organization called TEC, the Executive Committee, and I would be invited occasionally to speak to that group. And they met for 4 hours, and they would invite a speaker in, and then they would spend the afternoon with each other debriefing what the speaker had to say. And in that famous Wisconsin phrase, sifting and winnowing what was useful and helpful and how it could be applied to the problems that they had as leaders. Some of you may know that protocol through its modern version called Visich, or you may have encountered it in the Young President's Organization, or you may have read about it in the CEO Roundtable. But it was very clear that, unlike most programs, there was the capacity in that protocol for people to actually begin to make real and internalize complex material that they were exposed to. the time that I was thinking about how one might bring spiritual concepts into a similar protocol, I met Reverend John Huntington. He was a entrepreneur, had founded a company. He was a physical chemist, founded a company in the Star Wars era, was identifying nuclear signatures of very esoteric work. In his late 50s, had a conversion, became an Episcopal priest, and wanted to become canon missioner to Silicon Valley for the Episcopal Church. And he was facing the same issue. How does one make in-depth spiritual concepts come alive to very busy people in complex situations? And one evening, we thought, could you create overlays to the Tech YPO CEO Roundtable that would include prayer and reflection and spiritual readings, wisdom readings, as well as managerial and social science readings? And what would happen if you did that? And he conducted an experiment at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Saratoga, invited a dozen senior executives to participate, and I was part of the evaluation team, and it had a stunning outcome. That all of a sudden, deep, complex dimensions of spiritual wisdom began to interpenetrate managerial thinking. And so I proposed to Bill Spohn, then director of the Bannon Center, that we try this as a faculty pilot. I wasn't in the room when the proposal was reviewed, but there are no secrets in universities, and I found out afterwards that there was almost unanimous agreement that it would never work with faculty. Never work with faculty. But they gave me permission to try it, and I am eternally grateful to Tracy Kahn, professor of psychology, who joined me in a pilot test of this protocol with faculty members. And we're here today to report on a 13-year experience with that protocol in the university sectors, Le Moyne and Santa Clara University, and with senior executives in healthcare. That notion that it was unlikely to work with faculty reflects the enormous intellectual independence of our profession. We're largely solo practitioners. Even if we're in a department, it's likely that our disciplinary work will be different than the disciplinary work of another colleague. We're used to being masters of our destiny, loosely coupled to the university. So it was a real challenge to ask whether or not this could fly in the context of university, although I had much more confidence already that it would fly in the context of the executive world, and this is our conversation. This is not the place to go into detail about the protocol. Let me just skim over it quickly. A senior leadership forum begins with reflections on a theme that the leaders are struggling with, refracted through the wisdom passages of multiple religious traditions. The Ignatian Faculty Forum always has some wisdom passages from the Ignatian tradition. And then each participant checks in and indicates what their life is like spiritually and professionally. On a scale of 0 to 10, is it the pits? 2. Is it going well? 10, spiritually and professionally. And a few words about what their personal situation, inner life is like at that particular time. And then we discuss readings that include readings refracting the topic from the social sciences, from the physical sciences, from theology, from wisdom readings, from religiously plural readings, and through the Ignatian lens. So the topic, we have about 50 pages of readings, but the topic is looked at through both the disciplinary insights of our intellectual heritage, as well as the spiritual insights from Ignatius and then from other traditions. And then in the second half of the meeting, individuals put up challenges. So think of that young faculty member who I just described, and she might say, we have a very, very difficult division within my department, and there's a political rift that I'm struggling with. And this hiring decision has divided us. And can you help me think about how I might approach this critical meeting I have tomorrow? And it could be a personal challenge, it could be a classroom challenge, it could be a student challenge, or what have you. And people share heuristics non-prescriptively. Here's something you might think about. Here's how you might approach that dilemma. And in the sharing, they go back to the learnings that have occurred in both the wisdom passages and in the readings. And then the person is held in silence of heart and prayer. And the person, all those impacted by the decision, and all the people struggling with similar decisions are held in prayer and heart. And then the next person shares their challenges. I'll let you read this slide. Interviews with participants, reviews by outside reviewers, evaluations by department chairs, self-evaluation of participants, suggests that these are the kind of outcomes that occur. Why? What's at work here? In lots of other papers, since I'm a professor of management, I've analyzed what's at work through the language of social psychology. But today I'd like to reflect on this experience in the language of Ignatian spirituality. The phrase God in all things is one of those phrases that is mystical, magical, and yet not immediately existential. It takes a shift in consciousness to see what's occurring in the complexity of one's professional life, in personal life, in the circumstances that are unfolding. And so the forum allows the opportunity for the day-to-day struggle, realities, complexities to be refracted in both the best of current social science and the best of spiritual wisdom. The light emerges as you begin to discover the way in which your colleagues think about similar challenges. The diversity of personalities and perspectives, in particular the diversity of disciplines, all of a sudden create a sense of the richness of what it means to be in the university. A prior life lived solely in the ghetto of one's own discipline and department expands to embrace a broader and more inclusive community. I love the words of John Hoy. You discover the good each of your faculty colleagues is trying to achieve through their life, through their scholarship, through their teaching, through their administrative duties. Now becomes visible. And all of a sudden, a sense of the potential magis of the total university adventure, the totality of the university's potential impact, comes alive. There's no other place in my experience within university life where that holistic heart, mind, spirit becomes as naked and visible and mysteriously wondrous as in the conversations among these colleagues under a condition of confidentiality. It is a kind of collective examine. Everything takes time. You don't really understand what certain problems emerging in your life are going to teach you. You're not certain how struggles shape history. You aren't certain how you're going to ride the ups and downs, the rhythms of consolation and desolation in Ignatian language. Faculty put it more misery, or it's been a pretty good month. And as you observe this wondrous unfolding among your colleagues, the deep personal adventure of each one of your scholar-teacher colleagues, you begin to realize that something wondrous does occur, that history is written large in the life struggles of each of these individuals. That the decisions that they're going to make on how to approach a particular classroom dilemma in their teaching, or a particular invitation with respect to scholarship, or a decision not to or to accept an administrative appointment, that changes history. It alters destiny. And you begin to see the great nobility of the individual involved in that adventure, the challenges that are implicit in it, and the need for companionship. So above all, the forum is a school of discernment. None of these problems are resolved in any single meeting. You companion the individual over a number of weeks and months as they think about, reflect on, make a decision, and then live with the consequences. You begin to discover the beauty of that struggle, the nobility of the suffering that is always involved in choices that are made in service to others. And you begin to understand the way in which the great wisdom resources of the Ignatian tradition and the great wisdom resources of the religious traditions provide a lens of comfort and insight and wisdom as we struggle. And most of us have been listening to David Brooks in the last few weeks, and it's that the two resumes, the professional resume and the funeral eulogy. And backstage in the forum, you're present to the funeral dimension. You're seeing the way in which character is shaping the decisions that your colleagues are making. And you begin to understand the importance of patience, of deep listening, of remaining in unknowing, of accepting unintended consequences, and leaning into the unexpected without fear, neurosis, anxiety, and the ability to step away from self into a greater form of service. In each meeting when the forum gathers, we light a candle of confidentiality. And people begin to share the intimacy of that personal, professional complexity. It was a time when the university was smaller. I think of my first appointment. I drove 5 minutes to the university. Most of my colleagues lived within 15 miles of where we were employed. Most of the disciplines were rather holistic. There wasn't a lot of subspecialization. The size of the institution was small. And in that setting, you had a sense that you were walking with your colleagues in this grand adventure of educational life. There's no return to those days. Our faculty live all over the Bay Area. I commute. On a good day, it only takes me 2.5 hours, or on a bad day, about 2.5 hours to get here. I'm coming from the North Bay. One of my colleagues is coming from Santa Cruz. Our world of disciplines become more and more specialized, and so we have less and less to talk about if our conversations are quick. The pressures are that you live in a world where mostly you are evaluated or you're instrumental, but you're not in that meeting as a whole person. And so to be in a setting where you are there as a whole person, the completeness of your life, your spiritual aspirations and desperations, the days of absolute darkness when you wonder how you're going to get through a dilemma, whether it's a professional dilemma or a familial dilemma. Community is rediscovered in this setting, and it is a rare and privileged place. So I look forward to the reflections of my colleagues as they talk about their experiences with the Leadership Forum format.
Thank you, Andre, very much. I'm pleased to introduce a few of the colleagues that Andre has invited. First of all, actually, this is in alphabetical order. Completely by chance. Elizabeth McCabe, the Executive Director of the Formation and Integration Initiatives at the Ministry Leadership Center. My brother, Jesuit Dave McCallum, Chief Mission Officer and Interim Vice President for University Advancement at Moyne University in Syracuse, New York. And Diarmuid Rooney, the Executive Director of Formation and Communication Technology at the Ministry Leadership Center. I think, Elizabeth, you were starting, right?
Well, we begin. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation and to be in your good company. This is actually my last slide, so we begin at the end. Although I think it's important, as Andre just, I will end with this as well, but this is a quote that comes often to me when I'm thinking about formation and what it is to be spiritually mature leaders in this day and age. The great Japanese poet Basho is attributed with having said, "Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise, seek what they sought." I think it is impossible for us in this day and age to do things the way that they have been done through the centuries. But to retrieve that wisdom and bring it forward into our time is very important. So I've been asked to address, in response to Andre's remarks, the need for lay formation and spiritual engagement as foundational to sustaining mission and Catholic identity in Catholic institutions. And I have a great passion for this because I believe that in our institutions, sometimes we think of our mission as what we do for those we serve. So in education, it's what we do in our education of others. In healthcare, it's how we serve patients and families. But at the heart of the work that we do is an invitation to each one of us to be transformed by our mission and identity as well. And the way that we reach into that is through formation. I think Andre's closing, he spoke about leaders companioning one another in a common adventure. Understanding this adventure will transform them individually and as a community. And I think that is a beautiful definition of formation. In the Ministry Leadership Center, we define formation as a process of socialization into the community, a process of socialization into the tradition for the purpose of building up the community and carrying on the tradition. We recognize that formation is communal, creative, and cumulative. And I think the IFF, as Andre outlined it, demonstrates this. When we say communal, it's that we recognize although each participant engages the program individually, the context is a community of leaders who support and challenge one another. It is within community that participants gain a personal sense of belonging, a sense of belonging to the organization, and leading the organization. We speak of the creativity of formation because participants are asked to make connections between their own sense of mission and values and the mission and values of the institutions entrusted to them. They are challenged to articulate Catholic identity and to integrate its fundamental concerns into the life and the mission of the organization, into their daily practice and their own lived experience. And we speak of formation as being cumulative. And here Andre just spoke about the fullness of time. We recognize that formation develops over time, that you grow on a shared journey as companions. So it is not the go away for a retreat, 2-day experience and come back formed, although that may be a formative experience. This is an ongoing, and the IFF is a demonstration of this, as is the work that we do in the Ministry Leadership Center. That cumulative dimension is very important. For Catholic institutions, spiritual formation is rooted in the Christian tradition, that gave birth to and continues to sustain the ministries of healthcare, education, and social services. Leaders in formation are invited to know more deeply the ways this broad and rich tradition can be a genuine resource for their own journey into increasing spiritual and psychological maturity, as well as a resource for the entire organization to think about its dynamic identity and mission. Formation, of course, is already happening in our institutions. It happens through culture, practices, and policies. The development of formation programs create a path on which participants can deepen their awareness of how they are being formed. They can be intentional about choosing formational practices, and they can welcome the active presence of the divine. From our experience at the Ministry Leadership Center, there's a couple of elements that we talk about as being successful elements of formation. And again, I think you'll see the fingerprints of the IFF all over these elements. We believe that a setting away from the day-to-day pressures, inviting dialogue and reflection and appropriate learning without distraction is very important. We believe that the group compositions, diversity, is very valuable to the formation experience. So for us, we have multi-healthcare systems participating together, learning from one another. In the IFF, you have interdisciplinary participation. This allows for transferable lessons. We use internationally recognized speakers who are both motivational and conceptually rigorous and have success in addressing senior leaders. These are speakers who are gifted at particularizing the theory as opposed to providing simply a general theory, particularizing it to the industry and to the people with whom we're working. And then there are formation facilitators. These are the folks who prepare materials and host the program, but they also stay with the formation experience. They are the thread that goes through the whole, throughout the repertoire of topics. They provide a comprehensive unity. And then there is action learning. We recognize that formation needs to be applicable to daily life. It needs to be pragmatic and practical. And a means to engage in action learning is a key element of formation. And then there's a piece where we're continually redesigning over and over again. We consider ourselves to be essential partners with those who participate in formation. We learn from one another, and that informs the way the program evolves and continues to be developed. There's a particular pedagogy that we use that I think is also evident in the IFF. The Ministry Leadership Center uses what we call the triangle. The triangle has three sharp edges. The Catholic tradition creates the agenda. The contemporary culture engages the agenda. And then the individual and communal experience evaluates the agenda. So this dynamic is consistently happening. It's only from these intersecting sources of insight we can fully have a balanced perspective. This respects and challenges the culture and resonates with individual and communal experience. The triangle is a representation of how the tradition is always unfolding. It is an active, dynamic thing, not static. And as Andre described the Ignatian Forum, you hear how those readings coming in, how there's a balance between the tradition, the cultural information, and then it's sifted through the lived experience of those participating in the forum. It's interesting to note that our contemporary culture is very engaged in and interested in issues of formation. So we hear constantly about the contemporary culture engaging in things like spirituality of the workplace, decision-making that includes discernment elements, spaces set aside for reflection and meditation, mindfulness practices are being introduced into secular organizations as really key and important leadership elements. Here you have the beautiful Mission Church. In Google, they have a mindfulness center on its campus. Sacred spaces set aside to invite in spaciousness. The most recent Harvard Business Review had an article in April on measuring the return on character. And it talked about 4 principles: integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion as universal. And it went through a series of things talking about a virtuoso leader and a self-focused leader. And they expected there would be a small relationship between business performance and character, but they were surprised to find that it was rather closely related. The article suggests at the end that with practice and counsel, character is developed. You can cultivate character and continue to hone it as you lead, act, and decide. And I would posit a means for developing character. A how-to is formation. Even the Pope has weighed in on this, sharing recently what he coined as his top 15 diseases of contemporary leadership. These diseases, as he outlines them, are a danger for every leader and every organization, and they can strike individual or community levels. Lay formation and spiritual engagement are antidotes to these pitfalls. They are curatives for the dis-ease of modern leadership. Certainly the attention to these model business practices and elements of successful leadership translate into quality and excellence. But Catholic higher education and Catholic healthcare are seeking to model a particular way of being in the world, a way of seeking truth and wholeness. This way is transformative. We are transformed in doing the work, just as we invite others to be transformed by receiving the fruit of our work. Advancing and moving the tradition forward in our place and time is part of our leadership commitment. What distinguishes us is something the world needs: leaders who will thrive as individuals and advance the mission, are enlivened, supported, and encouraged in their daily work through formation. And this is why I say, as Basho said, do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise, seek what they sought. Leadership draws from a deep well and brings nourishment up from the wisdom traditions about what it is to lead a meaningful life that contributes to the whole community. It harkens us back to the founding inspiration of our institutions. We do not seek to do what they did the way they did it, but we seek what they sought, to be a particular way in the world that strengthens and enlivens the whole community and brings goodness into the world. To be such transformative agents, to embody such a noble cause, puts formation as central. Leaders companioning one another in a common adventure. It's my privilege to turn this podium over to Father David McCallum.
And it's my privilege to be here in sunny California, coming from snowy Syracuse, where on Thursday and Friday it actually was snowing. And I am really delighted to be out here with you. I'm very grateful to Mick and to Teresa and the center, to Andre, who's an old friend and in fact helped us to start the IFF in Syracuse at Moyne, and to my new friends Elizabeth and Diarmuid. This is really a great honor to be with you today and to share a little bit of our experience at Moyne. And in order to do that, I'd actually like to invite you to have an experience right now beyond listening, right? I know it's a little dangerous to introduce the idea of sitting quietly with your eyes closed and listening to poetry in the late afternoon, but are you with me? Would you like to try this? Okay. So I'd invite you to find a comfortable but alert position in your chair. And I'd invite you, just as you open your mind, your heart, your sensibilities to listen. This is something that we often do at the beginning of these IFFs as a way of kind of creating space, a sort of sacred space in addition to the candle. So I invite you, if you would, to close your eyes and just attend to the words as they as they come into your own sensibility and experience. This is called The Way of the Dolphin, and it is by Mark Nepo, who survived cancer, and this is a reflection on that experience. Standing in the harbor, these slick wonders slip their fins in and out of early sun. I close my eyes and remember being wheeled into surgery all those years ago, believing my job was to meet my surgeon at the surface. So the rib he had to remove would slip out like a dolphin of bone as soon as he would cut me. I've learned that everything that matters goes the way of the dolphin, drifting most of the time out of view, breaking surface when we least expect it. And our job of finding God, in being God, in finding truth, in being truth, in finding love and being love, is to meet the world at the surface where spirit slips out through every cut. And our job in finding God, in being God, in finding truth, in being truth, in finding love, in being love, is to meet the world at the surface where spirit slips out through every cut. If you haven't fallen asleep and you'd like to open your eyes, please do. There's a little story there. So this is the only book that I brought out with me here to Santa Clara. I had my iPad, but I like to have a real book, you know. I wonder if you're the same way. I just happened yesterday to open up to this particular poem, and oddly enough, if you haven't noticed, the dolphin, very strangely, is the mascot of Moyne College in Syracuse, New York. It's much more appropriate to Santa Clara, of course, right, where you have the Bronco. But as I was reflecting on the experience of opening up this book to the random page to find a poem that seemed so apt for our reflection today, I was really thinking about how the work of contemplative leadership is about paying attention to connections, and not only about constructing them or forcing them or projecting them, but about discovering the natural interconnections that exist between things, among things. And then that contemplative leadership is about being able to discern purpose, and then to act from within the matrix of those relationships, not against or upon, but from within. Whether we're thinking about contemplative leadership within complex organizations like universities or hospitals, or within the public sector, in our corporations or our civic government. But this work of contemplative leadership needs spaces where it can be cultivated, spaces where people can be encouraged and where it can be fostered to deepen. So the work of creating these spaces, this is really the work of the IFFs, both here at Santa Clara, obviously, and at Moyne. This way of being present is very much about keeping track of the why, the purpose for which our institutions exist, the mission that drives us. And as Andre explained, there is this kind of loosely coupled sensibility within higher education where we have lots of independent practitioners and experts kind of loosely joined, like flowers and weeds in a garden. And I'm not going to say who's the weeds and who's the flowers, but that sense of, you know, the garden that a university or a hospital, for that matter, is. It's not necessarily enough for people to feel a sense of shared purpose, shared commitment, a shared vision for what the outcome of our work is meant to be. And yet, again, in spaces of conversation, we discover the connections. We discover the thread of meaning which links the why with the what we do and how we do it, and hopefully how we do it differently from other institutions. So I hope this isn't too much poetry and soft stuff for you when we're talking about ROI and bottom line. Because in fact, just as Andre was saying, the work of contemplative leadership is very much about moving past the dualistic either-or way of looking at the world. And it's very much about developing this both-and sensibility, this kind of analogical imagination, as we call it, within our own Catholic tradition. At Moyne College, we're a small Jesuit comprehensive liberal arts school, roughly, actually smaller than Santa Clara because you have these graduate programs, but we're about 3,500. And yet even with that scale, the challenges of coming to a sense of shared purpose and meaning, both as faculty and as administrators and staff, is no easy feat. At Moyne, we actually use a method, a lens, a heuristic that helps to guide our work. And it's in fact taken from the model of organizational development. And what we do is we try to understand the complementarity of the work of fostering individual values, principles, intentions, and assumptions, the kind of individual formation of the IFF, with intentional work at building our collective values, sensibilities, and culture, fostering closely knit relationships that cross departments and sectors and functions. And very importantly, if this is in a sense inhabiting within us, we want to manifest it then in the actual concrete behaviors of individuals, the knowledge, the expertise, the way of proceeding that people have, as well as in our structures, policies, procedures, and rituals. So the work of mission integration at Moyne is actually a complex work that transcends individual formation and onboarding. It's also making sure that our mission and values are permeating our structures, our policies, the way we're recruiting new faculty, the way that we're recruiting new staff, appreciating the importance of diversity, which is right within our mission statement, and at the same time, looking for people who have an enthusiastic embrace of our shared values. When we look at the IFF in particular, we've adapted the Ignatian Faculty Forum for our faculty, but we've also developed one for administrators and staff. And the format that Andre explained is very much the same, although I must admit, staff and administrators have a little less patience for conversation, so instead of 4 hours, we meet for 3. It's not that there's not a lot to say, but there's that sort of instrumental push that people feel this sense of urgency to get back to the office. In the staff and administrative forum, there is a sacred space. We light the candle. And in fact, it's very interesting when people are on campus and run into each other, they'll use this as a kind of expression. Is the candle lit? Can we have an honest conversation here? Will it go beyond these walls? Will you respect the kind of sacredness of the trust that we've developed, the integrity of the relationship that allows us to have a much more coherent culture? So we've also changed the format and the content of the curriculum. We've added many more readings around spirituality and leadership, Chris Lowney's work, heroic leadership, the work of emotional intelligence and its translation into leadership, the work of Boyatzis and McCabe. These readings seem to really fit and have a sense of resonance with our staff and administrators as they're trying to reflect on what is the real difference that this should make in my day-to-day work and operations. When we did a survey this past spring of the experience of about 35 of 50 of those participants, on a scale of 1 to 10, we asked people, to what extent did this experience of the Ignatian Staff and Leadership Forum enhance your experience on these different areas? And on a scale of 1 to 10, we had extremely high marks. So as you can see, the understanding of the mission was enhanced on a scale of 8.8 out of 10. Appreciation for the mission that people came out of this experience with, 9.4. The sense of being empowered to serve as an ambassador for the mission, And again, many times we're talking about people who are not raised as Catholics, people who are coming from other religious traditions, or who would identify themselves as secular humanists. The experience of community, 9.3. The sense of impact on our culture for mission, 9.3. A space for personal growth, 8.6. Professional development, 8.4. And the sense of an enhanced identification as an Ignatian educator. I'm going to just offer you a bunch of testimonials you could read on your own. So I'm going to stop and allow you to read through these. This is a little bit of a quote, though, that I thought was a nice one at this point, because it says so much about our spirit of the Magis and what we want to do, which is beyond just doing a job well done. So these are testimonials that people wrote in as they were filling out the survey. And I'll give you some time for each one. I hope that gives you some sense of a taste of the experience of these administrative leaders and staff who participated in the forum over the course of 1 year. I could go on to say a lot more about how that ends up being integrated in people's day-to-day experience, but I'm conscious of time, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go forward. But it's now my pleasure to introduce Diarmuid Rooney, who will come up and share with us more about the Ministry Leadership Center.
We seem to be beginning at the end in all of these. I think the first thing I want to say is I'm amazed about the continuity that I'm hearing and seeing in each of the presentations we're giving. And you're going to hear more as I have been asked to explicitly talk about the experiential outcomes of people who have been through this process. But I want to do a few things first. First of all, two people have asked me already, how do I say my name? So in case you don't notice the accent, it is actually Irish, and the name is as well. So I want you to put on your imaginary hats and think of a deer running through a field and the midpoint of that field, Diarmuid. I did this once when I worked in a large hospital system. After the meeting, a manager saw me walking down the corridor and said, "Hi, Deer Pond." So they got the images a little bit confused. So Diarmuid is the easiest way. It doesn't help by looking at the way it's spelt in Gaelic. I loved the title of this presentation, The Bottom Line of Contemplative Leadership. We don't normally talk about the bottom line in the spiritual traditions. We normally talk about it very much in the business world. So there's something very prophetic just in the title of this presentation that Andre has brought us together. And that leads me to the first thing I want to talk about. Every thing we do in our lives, but especially our own histories, has a story of origin. And the IFF program has become the SLF, the Senior Leadership Formation Forum in Catholic Healthcare. And it has an origin story. And like all good, especially the country I come from, like all good origin stories, it began in a bar, in the airport. That's where this began. And it was Andre's prophetic vision, combined with Larry O'Connell, the CEO of MLC, where Elizabeth and I worked, along with a senior leader in a healthcare system, came together. And why did they come together? Because there was a felt need that something had to shift if the continuity and legacy of the founders and foundresses of this extraordinary institutes like education, healthcare, Catholic charities, if something is going to be the line that makes this continue, the legacy, what is it? That's the felt need. And we were very lucky because the leader was one of the, in Oregon, was one of the leader of the largest healthcare organization, 16,000 employees. And he knew Andre right back in the mid-70s. He knew his work. And then he experienced him at MLC. So there was a heartfelt connection with Andre. And then Larry and Andre had this idea, if the IFF was working so well in education, is it possible that it could work in the business world? Is it possible that it could work in healthcare? So that was what that meeting was about. But you can hear already the tenets of formation, relationship, heart connection. That's how this was birthed. The very first session, and of course I was on the MLC team and I experienced the IFF, but I remember meeting at 6 a.m. in the Jesuit Retreat Center up in Oregon, in Portland, meeting with Andre to launch this out. And of course there was a lot of nervousness about this. The first thing I noted was the CEO of the 16,000 people organization was there setting up the chairs. And then I said, okay, here's a leader that walks his talk. I knew we were onto something very good. And then the second thing was the ease with which Andre and I were able to work. And I attribute that solely to Andre's years of experience and not in any way doubting ever that this was a grace and a gift that the Holy Spirit was going to infuse with possibility. And that's exactly how it unfolded. And I want to tell the story of the 4 years. So that was the origins of how we got to be there. And I really want to use the words, rather than Likert scales and statistics, I want to use the words of the people who have experienced this over 4 years. After about 18 months, we did a kind of plus delta with them. And then we did, after 4 years, we did more formal interviews and surveys with them. And really, the first thing you need to know about this team, okay, they're a team that lead a very large organization. They're a team that are in healthcare, which, like education, is drinking from the fire hose in terms of change, rapid change. And also, they're really, really busy executives. So the idea of sitting together for 4 hours was definitely anathema to them in the beginning. But here's what happened over the course of the journey together. And I'm going to use their language. In Ireland, we love a good story, and we love the words of people in their story. So these are what I would call the individual. Anybody here is in HR always knows we're looking for the behavioral changes. These are the behavioral changes we noted. But here's the words that go with these behavioral changes. I am learning the value of listening and coaching others as the primary form of leadership, resulting in their ability to make appropriate decisions and, if necessary, self-correct. This movement from tactician to strategist and meaning maker in an organization, that came through over and over again. Then I was really struck by there is a solidarity that emerges because we are able to speak openly in a safe place. We can see the bigger picture and value what we are part of and the importance of service to all the associates we serve, the clients, the patients, and of course our place in the community. You can literally hear the refrain, the language of the tradition, coming straight through in these quotes. You don't need to break them open. It's the triangle as Elizabeth showed or displayed it in working in that wonderful dynamism that it has, where the tradition meets the culture and changes the lived reality of the individual experience. This is another quote. It is a privilege to have time to talk together. These are people who said, right, 4 hours, you've got to be kidding me when we began this. They actually self-corrected themselves, and after the first 12 months said, we need to do this in 3 hours. And we said, fine. And then after about 6 months of that, they self-corrected again and said, no, we absolutely need the 4 hours, which is very interesting in terms of team dynamics, how much they saw the value of this extraordinary prophetic process that was so richly adapted by Andre. It is a privilege to have time to talk together about the larger issues, to have time for mature thinking. That really takes time. Otherwise, this never happens. This is real discernment, and we are living the mission and holding ourselves accountable in a way I have never experienced before in my work life. 35 years in healthcare. And I was really struck again by one of the stories, and this isn't breaking any confidentiality around the candle, but one of them talked about the fact that after, this is someone who had been over 20 years in healthcare, and in the mission at that particular time was the healing ministry of Jesus. And they said they had avoided talking about that word for effectively 17 years until they went through a formation experience and realized what it might mean. When they heard the gospel message in a very different way, Jesus' parables breaking open radical inclusivity as a core value, accompanying people in their journey, especially and even unto death, and restoration, which is so crucial to community, which is displayed all the time in the Gospels, restoration to love and serve. So this is what happens in formation. A new level of dialogue takes place that people are more open to, more receptive to, and of course, it moves from informational to formational to transformational. So that's the team experience, that's the individual experience. The team experience, which is really important as well, and these are the headings, and again, I'll just use a few quotes to talk to the reports and the change in team dynamics. So we're seeing huge individual behaviors, individual behavioral change, which are being documented, and we're also seeing the whole team dynamic change. Now, this is a team that went through, over the course of the 4 years, they went through 2 CEOs, like one CEO and then another CEO. The CEO who met in the airport that day transitioned to another CEO, retired. They went through a merger with a non-faith-based health system, and they went through the leadership team itself. After the end of 4 years, was only left with 2 members of the original 10. Okay, so they went through massive change, a lot of which you're familiar with, but they really saw this senior leadership formation, or the IFF work, as not only holding a container for them as they went through this transition, but also it onboarded people into the executive role in a radically different way than the norm. As they were entered into this circle of shared dialogue, Andre showed you the beautiful process. They were invited by the people who had the experience of these 4 hours every couple of months together. They saw this is a different environment, and this is what they said. And trust was the biggest theme for this. Where else within organizational life are you able to discuss prayer and the deep inner life in the context of organizational life? We have gotten to know each other better in this setting than any other, and this has built profound trust. Next, I always wanted to work in a place where there is mutual support. In SLF, it grows each time we meet, and one feels the truth of our mutuality. It is special to work with individuals who communicate openly, have trust, and are there to help you anticipate challenges and support you in difficulties. Andre and I witnessed this team having to downsize and having to lay off people. We witnessed 2 executive members break down as they knew they had to let go of colleagues. Even when I remember, it was so moving, and how they discerned to do this in the most respectful way possible. I thought that was an extraordinary compliment to the work. And then a few other quick quotes. What a gift to spend a morning in spiritual grounding dialogue. I literally never really knew some of my colleagues who I've worked with for over 20 years. We just don't take the time to do this anymore, and now we can. SLF is a critical part of how we developed as a team. It is a privilege to have dedicated time to do this work. If you want empirical evidence, look at the team dynamic. I love that quote. And then finally, the bottom line of contemplative leadership. They all talked about newly found spiritual practices through this work. It opened up something. The richness of the Catholic anthropology of what it means to be human, when it can be grounded in a person's experience, it can break open something so unique for a person, but that the spirit finally gets its rightful place as body, mind, spirit. It gets included as the missing dimension of what it means to be a human being, which is the greatest threat with secularity. Not that there's anything wrong with secular humanism at all, but the dissolving or the diluting of that fundamental part of what it means to be human. And the bottom line of contemplative leadership is introducing people to practices that actually allow their spirit to be nourished and to grow. Cultivating a contemplative disposition means engaging in practices that touch and focus on the interiority of what it means to be a human being. And here's what they said. I have learned to give myself more time for reflection and prayer, not just general prayer, but prayer connected to my core work, and I am gently encouraging this with my direct reports. Another person, this was the difference marker, much more powerful than I anticipated. I make sure I take time for meditation and reflection daily. And of course, we had to go through and have been through the whole problem with this busy life. Of course we don't take time. And to tell these people that in contemplation, there's no end result. You're not going to get anything out of it. That it's not going to, there's nothing to be striven for. This was a huge shift in consciousness for executives. But now guess what we're hearing? They're taking that 10 minutes every morning to center themselves. Some are doing 20 minutes centering prayer every day in light of this experience. And it's changing not only who they are as a leader, but how they're perceived as a leader, and it's changing the culture of the organization. And that's kind of really where I want to conclude, which is the privilege that they talk about that this has given them in their lives, how the investment that the organization is making in them, how rich and privileged they are to experience this. The words that they talk about all the time are the impact is profound. It's incredibly valuable. It's joyful to look forward to. It's my favorite moment each quarter. It changes the way we make decisions. Oftentimes we do this in the morning with them, and then they'd make strategic decisions in the afternoon, and they always say changed the nature of the decision making. And I'll finish on one last quote. This process has changed the way we see and understand our work, our relationship with ourselves and with each other, and how we can serve others and the community by bringing God's love alive in the world. So now I hope we're going to continue the dialogue with some questions and all of this.
Thank you, Diarmuid. Let's thank all of the panelists. We have a few minutes for some questions, dialogue, comments on the part of anyone in the audience. Tom Plant, let's get a microphone back to him.
Thank you, Andre, and everyone for your terrific presentations. They were wonderful and inspirational, too. Two questions for you. One, you talk about integrating the sort of the IFF model in higher education, business, and healthcare, but it seems like politics is screaming out for something like this. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts or if it has been used in, or could be used in Washington, D.C., as well as some other places, because it seems like the political world is absolutely screaming for this kind of thing. And then the second question, if I may, is the quotes are terrific, but I can't help it as more of an empirical kind of person. I'm just wondering about some outcome assessments that has been done in terms of, compassion, gratitude, turnover, and a variety of other kind of outcome assessments.
Yeah, you turn it on.
Let Diarmuid respond because we do have quantitative data and he can describe it. The political question is very interesting. There is a program sponsored by at Georgetown University, part of what used to be the Fellows program there that John Hoy was associated with, where a number, which I had the privilege of attending one meeting, and a number of the people were prominent political figures and lobbyists. It went through a somewhat similar protocol to this, and they found it valuable enough in the busy world of politics and all the pressures that they experience to meet very regularly. But it's the only instance I know of in the political sector.
And just in response to the assessment, I'm with you. I'm into pie charts and Likert scales and outcomes. And we have a statistician who's worked with us from the University of Chicago, Professor Bill McCready, from the very beginning. 10 years ago, he came on board as we began. And he has been evaluating the entire life cycle of the leaders who've gone through this program. And he's created a leadership help me out from the leadership infantry alignment, a leadership alignment tool. The name has changed a number of times, and it's specifically looking at behavioral outcomes and the effect that that's having on culture. The next step of this, because there's still quite a lot of self-reporting, will be to take it into a 360 process, and then it will be to link it directly with employee satisfaction scores, and also in this context it will be patient satisfaction scores, or in your context student satisfaction scores. So yes, that is being done, and that is the next step if we are to make sure that formation can take the traction hold that it needs when we're putting together ROIs or business cases for its development. I hope that answers some of your question.
Question: why do you, let's say, support confidence when you light a candle on issues which you don't have to identify who gave the issues, but the issues could be surfacing that are extremely important? And if you keep those issues in confidence, you're not going to be able to correct really the key issues, possibly.
Okay, well, I think, first of all, it's the candle is a candle of confidentiality. And I think the nature is to create a sacred space where the issues and the people can feel the depth of community, which really builds a sense of trust. It also shifts the understanding that this space, although it still is very much a business space, it's also now a sacred space. So it's really a shift in our understanding of what we're doing. It in no way believes that the issues that get raised will not need to be addressed elsewhere. They very may well, and hopefully they definitely will. But it gives the opportunity for people, especially in senior leadership positions, not only to say what's going on for them, but to get peer support and peer, it's not even so much advice, it's just peer understanding of what they've been like when they've gone through that experience. But it's in no way trying to, this is some sort of secret forum. And I certainly assure you, what happens in the forum may not be talked about outside of the forum, but the issues that are given risen to and the themes that are given risen to are certainly going to be addressed.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I'm a physical therapy student currently, and I'm going to be working in the healthcare industry, for many years to come. And I'm wondering, how would this, all these concepts and ideas, trickle down to the patient on a practical level, or what kind of impact would they feel as a result of the healthcare workers, going through this type of process?
So one of the things we talk about is the executive influence on what the experience at the bedside or in the patient care setting. So when you're working with senior leaders in formation, they recognize they have an influence on that. So built into the policies and structures and protocols of a health system, the way those executive leaders are approaching that can influence the caregiving. Formation within a system, so formation that would occur at other levels, senior executive, physician formation, associate formation, is the way that you understand your calling to be a physical therapist, the way that you encounter every patient that you work with, and what you're striving to do in that relationship can be influenced by formation. So it isn't just a transaction, it's a transformational and sacred encounter.
We're always encouraging the cascading of this down through the organization. That's ultimately the purpose of the whole process. And one of the things that one system has done with this is they've introduced that every encounter is a sacred encounter. And that's right, and the main place that's being lived out is at the front line. And how can we support the person who's having the interactions with patients and clients to actually know what that means? And that really is formation.
We have time for one more question, and okay, sir.
Question from my old days at school, I guess, but you've been talking from top down. Now, has it ever been tried from bottom up, or middle level up or down, whichever way you want to address it?
So I think it's an important feature of the conversation that culture, as you say, has to be really grown from many different places, ground up, top down, from the sides. So, for instance, at Moyne, the interest has been to try out pilots where we would have separate faculty, staff, and administrative forums. And now there's been a kind of initiative that several people would like to graduate to a mixed forum, because they think that's really the best way to start to break down some of the divisive barriers and misunderstandings that crop up between the different strata of an institution. And Moyne's, not exempt from the faculty administrative tensions that exist in many schools. I think you saw the quote about the corporate model and the way that that's felt by people. So the question is, how is there sufficient space for real safety in terms of people who are not necessarily authorized with tenure to speak up and speak out, to have the conversation with people who are, and also with those who are serving at the will of the president. It creates power dynamics that are very tricky to work out. But we're thinking it's really going to be worth the time to try it, to try a pilot group and to find out. I don't know if that helps.
Let's thank Andre, Elizabeth, Diarmuid, and David for their presentation today. Is that it right? My name is Mick McCarthy, after all. Another Irishman. Just a few announcements. It's very helpful for us to have your feedback, so you can fill out either the paper evaluations, or if you RSVP'd by email, you will receive a link. And then to announce that the next event is on Friday, May 8th. We are hosting the next Bannon Institute lecture with Martha Nussbaum of the University of Chicago, who is going to be speaking on citizens and leaders, the public role of the humanities. That lecture will be here in the St. Clair room, but please note that it will begin a little earlier. It will begin at 2 o'clock because it's a Friday. Thank you very much, and let's thank our speakers one more time.